Well, I am thrilled to welcome Sahil Bloom to our leadership discussion series early here in 2025 to talk about his new, about to be released, The Five Types of Wealth, which I was lucky enough to get an early bootleg copy. Sahil, welcome.
Oh, I hope it wasn't too bootleg, but I appreciate you having me. Thank you.
Well, you sent it to me, so it is whatever it was found to be. Look, I've been a big fan of your newsletter called Curiosity Chronicles for years, which I was talking to somebody, my wife over the weekend about. She's like, well, what's the genre? I'm like, well, it's kind of part Arthur Brooks, it's part James Clear, it's part Morgan Housel, who are three of my faves, but it's kind of all Sahil Bloom. I mean, you're building your own kind of lane here on life tips and management perspectives and quotes that give you ideas and stories and history. And like you were just talking about, the fact that I tweeted you one time and then you DM me and you're like, dude, I read your stuff too, which I thought was super cool. So it's great to have you here. It's great to dive into your first book. Congratulations on releasing.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Yeah, and this is definitely a mutual admiration club here because I mentioned this to you before, but I have been an avid reader of your quarterly decks that you send out. At my old firm, you were like one of the gods that we had up on the wall. We would send those things around, and it was
That
it was
firm
hugely
was
informative.
Enron.
They're actually doing very, very well. Probably partially because I left. They're doing so well. They're doing much better without me.
So I want to jump into everything, and I think we're going to get into the five types of wealth and the thesis and all, but you got to begin with, of course, the band before us, and frankly, we got to begin with the most obvious observation. When you climb the mountain to seek the guru, sitting cross-legged, who has understood, has figured out the meaning of life, at the top of the mountain, you get to the pinnacle. It ain't a millennial. And yet, here you are, 34, written a really thoughtful piece on the heels of years of thoughtful stuff. Help us understand how you got into the life wisdom business at a very young age. And you kind of have your origin story told as you're supposed to here in the front, but share with the audience, how'd you get from being a kicking ass striver at your old firm to where you are now?
Sure. Look, I think the greatest discoveries in life come not from finding the right answers, but from asking the right questions. And when I think about wisdom, when I think about sharing, when I think about content, anything that I'm putting out into the world, I really try to avoid ever giving people the answers for their lives because, quite frankly, I don't have them. Yeah, as you said, I'm 34 years old. I don't feel as though I have all of the perfect answers. I am very much on the journey. But what I have done is spend a lot of time sitting with the questions and thinking about the questions and spending time with thousands of different people over the last several years, understanding what are those fundamental questions. And so if I were to trace this line through my life, um, the most common thread that I can find is this idea of rejecting common convention as being something that I feel is sort of ingrained in my DNA. My parents are a very unlikely story. My mom was born and raised in Bangalore, India. My dad is white, Jewish from the Bronx, New York. And they crossed over by 2 weeks when my mom had come over to the US for school. My dad was finishing his PhD. And they went out on a date. And my dad told my mom on that first date, my father will never accept us. And my mom was so blinded by his use of the word us that she completely missed the message. And unfortunately, my dad was right. His father was not accepting and forced my dad to choose between my mom and his family. And my dad walked out the door and never saw his family again. To this day, I have never met my dad's parents. He has three siblings I've never met. I have first cousins out there in the world that I've never met. And that choice that my parents made to reject the default path that was handed to them for their lives and to choose their own, to carve their own, that made no sense to anyone in the world but them. I feel like that sort of set this ripple effect off into my life in some ways to question some of the assumptions, some of the default definitions, those things that have been handed to you. So all along during my life, I feel like that has been a common thread. It just took 30 years for it to manifest in a very public way. I spent the first 30 years of my life chasing very traditional versions of what it looks like to live a successful life. I was a very insecure kid. My sister was really high performing academically. I tried to find what my path would be to get the pats on the back because I didn't think I was that smart. I played baseball. That was a great way to get pats on the back. I got quite good at it and ended up getting a scholarship to play in college. After college, I got a job at a really great investment fund where I started working. I basically thought and was operating under the assumption that my pathway to living a happy, successful life was a certain number in my bank account. And along that journey, as I continued to rise through that and kind of win that game in certain ways, I lost sight of a lot of other things in my life. In my own sort of narrow prioritization and focus on the one thing, which was money, had started meaning that I was losing in a lot of other things. I had started to see my relationships suffer because I wasn't putting them at the forefront of my life. I wasn't seeing my parents more than once a year. My relationship with my sister had really ground to a halt. My wife and I were struggling to conceive at the time. That was creating strain in our life. My health was suffering. I was drinking too much, frankly, and I was hiding a lot of things from the world. And so on the surface, you sort of had this life where it seemed like I was kind of winning the game, like I was doing the things that people tell you you should want to do. But because of my own narrow focus and almost myopic focus on money and status, I had really started to lose in a lot of different ways. And I started to have this sensation when COVID hit and when I was stuck at home and feeling quite lonely and down and dark that if this was what winning felt like, I had to be playing the wrong game. And that all sort of started to spark this change to start finding myself in more creative work, to start writing, to start sharing things. And in that quest, I started to find a real calling and a real purpose in helping others and in this sort of active service, if you will, with the world.
Well, and you described you had that moment with a friend where you realized that if you see your parents once a year, which was your pace, and they were in their 60s, then you had about 15 or so more times you could expect to see them before the most important people in your life for so much of your life would be gone. Um, that kind of led to this not quite Jerry Maguire moment, but where you had this, maybe I'm playing the wrong game. It's time to reassess. So that's the why. How about the what? Because I get that you concluded I want to move back closer to my family. I want to get out of an industry that maybe has me working 100 hours a week. Those kind of make sense. But what led you to realize, and I'm going to come up with this kind of multi-pronged, I'm going to create stuff, invest in businesses. This kind of empire you're building now is not a traditional. It's not like you just go from, I'm going to go from medicine to law. What you're in now, please describe it. But it at least to me seems to almost defy easy description. How did you go from you knew you didn't want to do what you were doing and who you wanted to be near to building this collection of things you're doing today?
Yeah, so when COVID hit in May of 2020, I was stuck at home. We weren't commuting, I wasn't traveling, and so I had more free time than I had used to have. And I started writing, and that was originally on Twitter. I was writing like, at the time, something that was unknown, which was Twitter threads, which have now become this sort of cringe and very common thing. But at the time, I think I might have been the first person to do it. So there was a real arbitrage from a growth standpoint in doing that. And I started to see it getting traction. It was clearly helping people. I was writing mainly about business and finance, things that I sort of knew about. And at the time, it was just like a weekend hobby. And I was finding a lot of excitement and interest and energy from it. So I kept doing it. And by the end of 2020, I think my platform on Twitter had grown from about 500 or so followers to 100,000 or so. So there was clearly a market response to it, but it was never like, oh, I'm going to do this for a living, right? No one would say they're going to go tweet for a living. That's just not really a thing, especially back then. It definitely wasn't when I'm working in this, high status and very successful track at a great firm with a great group of people. And it was when I had that realization in May of 2021 about the amount of time I had left with the people that I love most that we realized we needed to be back on the East Coast. We needed to make this change to live closer to our family. But my initial operating assumption was I'm just going to go do the same thing that I'm doing now, just on the East Coast. I'm going to, work at an investment fund, but on the East Coast, closer to family. And it was my wife and it was a mentor. Who were the two people that sort of questioned that assumption for me. I don't have an entrepreneurial bone in my body. I mean, I mean it when I say that. My dad is a tenured professor. Like I was raised for the safe, steady track. Tenured professorship is like the safest thing you can possibly do. And so I don't feel like I had the default bug to say, oh, I can go build these things. I can go start stuff. What happened was I told my wife what I was planning to do. I was going to go start interviewing at these other firms. I was not having success with that because, frankly, I wouldn't have been particularly great at that if I'm going to look at it in hindsight. I was smart enough. I could sort of chew glass in the profession, but I wouldn't say I was a world-class, private equity investor or like late-stage growth investor, which is what I was looking to do. And it was my wife who originally said, "Can't you do this thing that you're doing on the weekends? Can't you do that like full time? Aren't people willing to pay you to like help them with these things? Aren't there businesses you could start? Isn't that a thing?" And then I had a mentor who I'll just say, it was Tim Cook, the CEO at Apple, who's been a mentor and friend for um, 10 years or so, who I mentioned this to, that I was thinking about this change. I was thinking about moving, and here were the two options. I was going to, continue and do the same thing that I'm doing, or I'm going to try this new thing. And he basically just said, "Oh, you should do this new. You clearly have a lot of energy for this other thing. You should go do that." And to hear that from someone that you respect and admire that much, that they didn't even bat an eye at it, that it was like an instantaneous, easy decision, was pretty deeply empowering. And so that was when the switch flipped, and I realized I can just go all in on this. And if it totally fails, at worst, it's a 2 year MBA. I'm going to give it 2 years, and I didn't go to business school. This will be like my business degree. I'll go try to build some things. I'll go create. I'll write. I'll see what happens. And it's been 4 years almost, and I'm still in that MBA. I'm still learning things along the journey, hopefully more than most business school degrees provide. And it's grown into this very cool platform across different things. Obviously, this book coming out, there's a handful of different businesses. I did raise a venture fund of my own, a small venture fund, and have built this pretty cool ecosystem that is very much my own path. That I would say there were no real precedents for.
So I want to turn to the book. I was about to turn to the book, but you did leave something there that we probably ought to just inquire about. I had a mentor, Tim Cook. First of all, is he looking for more mentees? But how did that come about? Because that's not normal.
Yeah, it is a very funny story. And he's actually the first blurb on the back of the book, which is quite cool that he was willing to do that. Tim and I met in 2014 through pure luck and chance, which was I was just starting my first job. That was summer of 2014, and I'd played Division I baseball, and so I wanted to continue my workout habit. And I knew that I was going to have long days at the office, and so if I was going to do that, I had to get to the gym early. So I decided I was going to start waking up at 3:45, and I was going to get to the gym by 4:30, 4:45, right when it opened, and I would work out and then get to the office a little after 6. And it turns out that there's not that many people willing to do that. So at this gym where I was going at the Equinox in Palo Alto, there were about 5 or 6 other people that showed up at that same time every morning. And one of them happened to be Tim Cook, who at the time was the relatively new CEO of Apple. I don't remember exactly when he had become CEO, but he certainly wasn't the prominent figure that he is today. He was the CEO of a large company, but he didn't have nearly the level of sort of cachet around him. At the time, there were a lot of questions about whether he would be able to follow in the footsteps of Steve Jobs. And we ended up, we would chat every single morning because there's a small group of people, and developed a relationship, friendship. And he started giving me kind of advice and insights on career and on journey. And we would chat about a lot of things that had nothing to do with either of our businesses. I'm fascinated by geopolitics, hence my reading of all of your work. I had studied public policy for my master's at Stanford, and Tim's role, by definition, has a whole lot of geopolitics involved in it. I mean, effectively, he's like a head of state. And so his knowledge on that space and his experience with it was fascinating to me. And so we spent time together over, several year period learning from him. And it became an incredible friendship, mentorship, and one that has continued to this day. And one of those friendships that sort of defies logic because I've never had anything really to provide in return. And there's a few people in your life who support you and provide genuine value when it doesn't seem to benefit them in any way. And those are the relationships to really be cherished on these journeys.
So I'll agree with that, although I will factor it into social wealth, which we will get to here in a minute. But just help, as you know, helping other people provides not only a ton of benefit, hopefully to the person being helped, but a whole lot of psychological benefit to the person who is the mentor and who is helping. But so let's get into now 5 types of wealth. What led you to decide this would be the framing? Why is it 5, not 3 or 7? And if you'll, I've got questions on several of the specific wealth types, but maybe give us the macro architecture, how you got here, and what the big picture concept of this book is.
So once I made the change from my prior life, we moved back to the East Coast. I sort of went on this journey to try to understand if money alone wasn't the thing that was going to create a great, fulfilling, happy life, what were the things? Like, if you were to redefine the scoreboard of how we measure our lives, what else would be on it? And the way that I went about that was I went and spent time with 1,000+ people over the course of several years, trying to understand what were the common threads, the common themes of what people wanted out of their lives, and then talking to much older people, what were the things that they would say to their younger selves. And what I found was that there were 4 common themes that came up over and over and over again, and it was time, people, purpose, and health. Money was sort of an enabler to some of those, but it was very rarely an end in and of itself. It was a tool, but not the goal, if you will. And so that was when I started to really have this framing of these 5 types of wealth as a new scoreboard for measuring your life. And I use the term scoreboard as a very important one because Peter Drucker, the famous management theorist, once said, "What gets measured gets managed." And that's the idea that the thing that you can measure ends up being the thing that you focus on narrowly, you kind of hone in on and optimize around. Money's measurability is a feature in certain ways. It has allowed us to create capitalist society and function in many ways, but it has become a bug on a personal level because it is so measurable that it becomes the one thing that you can hone in on, that you refresh your app over and over again to see how you're doing on that one scoreboard that you have for your life. And unfortunately, it is not conducive alone to creating the life that you want. We need these other things in our lives to feel like we are thriving. And so what I thought was, why don't we redefine, create this new scoreboard? Because when you have and can measure the right things, you end up taking the right actions, and then you create the right outcomes that you really want.
All right. There are 5 of these, starting with time, which I totally get. It seems like the key more than any of the others to all of the rest. A huge element of time wealth, as you describe it, is the ability to set your own schedule. To be, it's not quite master of your own domain, to quote Seinfeld, but to focus on what gives you energy, where and how you want. And what I bet everybody who reads this book will first think is, how do you gain control of your own time when we all have clients or bosses, or even in your case, an audience that you need to grow and feed? If you don't publish for 2 months because you're in control of your own time, the flywheel stops moving. So how does one gain control of one's time when so much depends typically on others?
So I think there's really 2 pillars that sort of build to this feeling of control. The first is awareness, and this is the most important. And the awareness is an awareness of the finite, impermanent nature of your time. It is an awareness of time as the real, most precious asset that you have in your life. The question I always ask people to bring this to life is, would you trade lives with Warren Buffett? He's worth $130 billion. He has access to absolutely anyone in the world. He flies around on private jets, has all the houses, mansions. He reads and learns for a living. Sounds great. But you wouldn't trade lives with him. simply because he is 95 years old. There's no way you would agree to trade the amount of time that he has left for $130 billion. So you know that cements this awareness that time is your most precious asset. It has literally incalculable value. And yet, on a daily basis, how much of your time are you really wasting? How much time are you spending scrolling, working on these one for one tasks, saying yes to things that you shouldn't have said yes to, comparing yourself to other people, doing all of these things that aren't actually leading you toward the life that you want? So that's the first piece, awareness. The second piece is about attention. And this is about a very important thing, which is to recognize that the greatest outcomes in your life come from deploying your attention into the few things that really matter. The 2 to 3 things that truly move the needle, that may create the 10 or 100x outcomes in your personal and professional life. Most of us, what we do, and this is myself included at times for sure, is we say yes to almost everything. So our schedules, what they look like, are a bunch of this hamster wheel activity. We kind of become like a rocking horse, actually. You're just going back and forth, but never actually going anywhere. The fix for that is saying no more effectively and then saying yes to the smaller handful of things that are actually going to create these outcomes in your life, that are actually going to move the needle.
It's I read that and I think about it, although I do feel like a lot of the things that I say yes to that are, you know, I don't know about you. I still try to take the approach of any student who reaches out and says they want to learn about what I do for a living. I'm going to say yes, kind of in a pay it forward, pay it back mindset, even though, boy, do those things just they interrupt and they eat clock. Um,
The challenge with that one, by the way, Bruce, is I've wrestled with that one a lot because, you might imagine like a lot of people now, my DMs are open everywhere. Like my email is public. I get a lot of those kind of messages. And I used to say yes to almost all of those. And my calendar would be filled with these phone calls that I find very energy draining, and that just suck up all of the free time that would have been in my calendar to think about some of these bigger picture things that I might be able to drive towards. And what I realized was, whenever you say, and I forget where I first heard this, but every single time you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. And understanding what you are saying no to by saying yes to this new thing is really important, because then you can actually make a clear eyed decision about whether or not to say yes to this new thing. So for me, since my son was born, I just have recognized that every single time I say yes to some new thing, some new opportunity, whether it's, a speaking gig or a phone call or whatever the thing might be, I'm saying no to time with my son. And with that frame in mind, I have a much higher bar to saying yes to anything new. Because it's literally a direct trade of this time and energy that you have that you can't get back. And I've had to talk to my wife about this because her bias is to say, like, you should be nice. You should, say yes and be nice. And sometimes being nice in that sense is actually being unkind to yourself. It's being unkind to the people that actually matter, that you really care about, or to the opportunities that actually matter. And, one of the other tests that I have in the book that I think is really useful is for new professional opportunities in particular. There's this idea that some people have had of asking yourself whether an opportunity is sort of a hell yes opportunity. Like, does it immediately elicit this excitement that I want to take this on? And I add a second layer to that, which is to say it is a hell yes opportunity. You're really excited to take it on. Now assume that it is going to take twice as long and be half as profitable as you currently think. Would you still want to do this new opportunity? If the answer is still yes, then you should go do it. But if the answer to that second question is no, you shouldn't take it on, because you naturally have this level of optimism, this like bias for positivity at the start of a new opportunity. It's that shiny object syndrome that we all get. And if you can cut that back and you still get excited, you still feel the energy pull towards this thing, generally speaking, it's going to be a good opportunity. But if you don't, you should just say no and keep that space free on your calendar so that you can deploy it into the big thing that may come along later.
All right. So you talk about never miss a Tuesday dinner. Talk about where that comes from, the CEO that you picked that up from, uh, why it matters, but also, is it really replicable if you're not a CEO? Because I feel like in my career, if I had turned people down in their times of need when I, had a job where I was striving, because I had, and not a, Sandy Koufax won't pitch on Yom Kippur a religious or other, I'm not going to miss the birth of a child, but just a Tuesday night I have dinner with my spouse. I feel like that would have hurt my ability to succeed and grow in a career.
So the idea of never miss a Tuesday dinner comes from the founder and first CEO of Netflix, Mark Randolph. And Mark had this longstanding rule in his entire technology career where he founded and built these transformative companies that every single Tuesday at 5 p.m. he would leave and go have dinner with his wife. And it was a known rule at all of his companies that if something was going on, if there was chaos, if everything was hitting the fan, you better meet him on the walk to the parking lot because it was a hard rule that he was leaving and he was going on this date. And what I realized in speaking with him was it had really nothing to do with the dinner, with the date, with the 5 p.m., with any of that. It was all about cementing his identity of who he was and about what was important to him, his priorities in life, and the ripple effect that that had in letting others know that were around him, both his family, his colleagues, people that worked for him, all of that, that he was creating these boundaries in his life, that he was real in these priorities that he had. And what he talks about is the fact that what he's most proud of in his career is not the companies that he created or the enterprise value that he built, but the fact that he was able to do that while still having a loving marriage and kids that want to hang out with him. And what I recognized in chatting with him is that we all need some similar kind of simple rule for how our ideal self is going to show up in the world at any season of our journey. And the reason I say season is to relate to your point there, Bruce, which is you are not always going to have the ability to say that kind of a hard rule, the 5 p.m. Tuesday dinner. That was very much a CEO founding a big company rule where he can probably create that. At different times and at different points in your journey, you are going to be in very different seasons. You are going to have a season early in your career, in the middle of your career, where you are really trying to build and focus on building financial wealth, building your career, building this foundation. And during that season, your sort of rule for life, that sort of identity defining statement is going to be different than when you are further along or when you are in a season of being a parent, when you're really focused on that, or when you're retired later in life. It's going to change. But understanding what that is during any one season is an important way for just thinking about navigating whatever chaos or opportunities come into your life.
All right. So one of the things I like about this book is you go back and forth between kind of the macro philosophical and the operationally practical. Here are specific operational tips. And one of them where I walked away feeling like I heard yes to both sides of a yes or no question in my head, which is I'm a big to-do list guy. I like doing that. And there's the Mark Andreessen advice, which you related, which is if you're thinking about what you're going to do for the day, pick like the three big things and only the three big things, because otherwise you may not do the actually three things that matter. You may do other stuff. And that feels like it's occasionally in contrast with my approach frequently to do, which is, the small wins can build momentum. So my weekend to do, I mean, I wake up, yes, success, didn't die, make your coffee, take the dog for a walk, go to the gym. Like I start often my Saturday and by 9 p.m., 9 a.m., I've got 8 wins, done, 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 done. How do you reconcile the momentum value versus the key is to keep just to make sure that the main thing is the main thing.
So Mark Andreessen's actual method incorporates that small wins thing actually as well, which is he on the back of that same card will write down all of the things that he got done that were not those three main things so that he can actually track what some of those other small wins were. But his point is if you do nothing other than nail those 2 to 3 things that you wrote on the front of the card, the day was a huge success. And so making sure you write down the minimum viable version of what a successful day looks like. Everything above that is going to be enormous upside. Anything else that you got done is sort of upside. On the back of the card, you're going to write those. I have sort of found a medium point here or a middle ground, which is I think that ambitious people are bad at recognizing wins. And like anyone that's on this right now or that's listening to this is probably a high achiever and probably very ambitious. And what you tend to do is you focus on all the things that you haven't gotten done, or like, oh my God. And you look at the to-do list item, you wrote down 8 things and you got 2 things done, and you feel this sense of dread, and it's just like piling up, building. And so I am wired that way. And what I have found is that writing down the 2 to 3 things that actually matter at the start of each day, and on Sunday nights, writing like the 1 or 2 or 3 things that would make a win for the week is a really nice way of sort of framing up the daily and the weekly to be conducive to that feeling of momentum. Like get those 2 to 3 things done per day, and you feel like the day was a win. And then on a macro zoomed out perspective, I know what it looks like to win the week, and I can kind of check those items off as I go.
All right, last time wealth question. How often should somebody reassess one's macro life plan and direction? You talk about your sort of epiphany moments or feelings, but it everybody's going to have a bad day. Everybody's going to have a bad week. Everybody, if you want to do anything successful, you're going to need to grind. You're going to need to compound. You go to the gym. It's every day is not. Hey man, my biceps that much bigger. It takes time and it takes work, and clearly people shouldn't conclude on the back of a bad moment that it's time for a huge pivot, or else you'll never get the compounding. What's your advice to people who are hearing you and maybe about to Pied Piper like be like, I'm dropping out and fully checking out to a whole new thing? How do you know when you just need to get a good night's sleep, maybe take a
Mhm.
weekend off, versus when it's time to do what you did, the big pivot?
Yeah, I think that the interesting thing about life and even the moment that we're in right now is there's this great celebration of inputs, right? Like growth mindset, Carol Dweck's work was big in helping us understand that, celebrating effort and celebrating inputs is really important, trains you to focus on the right things. And I'm sort of 2 minds on this, which is it's great to be really proud of your inputs, but at the end of the day, the world is going to judge you on your outputs. No one cares about your deep work routine or your morning routine if your outputs are bad and if the quality of your outputs is bad. And if the quality of your outputs is bad over a sustained period of time, you should probably take a close look at whether the inputs are creating the right trend line in what you are doing. And so I think that the right time frame for looking on that tends to be quarterly. To zoom out and think about whether your kind of daily systems, whether the things that you're actually doing, the inputs on a daily basis, are actually creating the right outcomes, the ones that you want, whether you're progressing, whether the trend line is good. And the analog that I've always used for this is like we celebrate people that pounded their head into a wall for years and then eventually made it. Like, Mr. Beast, the famous YouTuber, everyone's like, well, he made videos for 10 years before he got a million views, and now look how successful he is. But he didn't really just make the same video for 10 years and then eventually it blew up just because he did it for 10 years. He was maniacal about getting better at some tiny thing every single video. He was literally maniacal at looking at the details of that every single day. That is really the lesson there. It is the fact that if I'm pounding my head into a wall behind me to try to get through it, if I pound my head into that wall 10 times or 20 times and I don't feel it budge at all, I should probably try a slightly different place on that wall. I should probably adjust the way that I'm hitting my head into the wall a little bit. That's kind of what I would suggest to people on your journey is if you feel like you're pounding your head into a wall, force yourself to zoom out quarterly and ask a handful of the sort of bigger picture questions. Like, are my systems actually leading me towards these goals? Are the things that I'm doing in line with what I would say my priorities are in life? Am I marching towards, a mountain that I actually want to reach the top of? That I would say is the fundamental question that too few people take a second to ask. We focus so much on speed and you lose sight of your direction. And, this is this idea that it's much better to climb slowly up the right mountain than it is to climb fast up the wrong one.
So ironically, I've spent so much time focused on time wealth that I'm as with about 10 minutes to go here, I'm running out on some of the others. But number two, social wealth, which is people, as you described it, and that can be family, and that can be friends and colleagues, that can be a community like your church. Are each of those types of social wealth more or less equivalent, or is it sort of like food groups, and that for to have proper social wealth, you need balance between family and kind of friends, and then people with whom you maybe have a shared project or mission?
I wouldn't think of it as family or friends or shared. I would think of it in two pieces where the foundation of social wealth is depth, which is a few close, deep relationships. These are the people that you can call at 3 in the morning when you're down and out, when things aren't working, when you're in trouble, when you're sick, when you have nothing to offer. Those few deep connections form the foundation, the base of your house, if you will. That can be family, and for a lot of people, that's family, but it doesn't have to be family. Some people don't have the privilege or the luck of having a family that they can rely on for those things. And so it can come from friends or other social relationships. Beyond that, you think about breadth. And the breadth comes from the looser set of connections to people beyond you. This can be acquaintances, those can be social groups, church groups, religious, community groups, regional, local, whatever it might be, but something where you feel like you're connected to something bigger than the self. It's really the combination of those two that you think about contributing to a life of social wealth. And I would just say that the most important thing, since I know we're tight on time, when it comes to social wealth, is understanding and having the mindset shift that investments in social wealth compound in the exact same way that investments in financial assets do. When you think about your financial wealth, you know that investing $50 or $100 today is better than zero because it's going to compound positively to build towards the future that you want. Same exact rule applies to your relationships. Investing a small amount in your relationships today is going to compound positively in your life. But you don't think that way when it comes to relationships typically. You don't think about the fact that sending the one text to the friend when you're thinking about them is an investment. It is going to compound positively in that relationship. Calling your mom for the 2 seconds that you have in the car ride is better than not calling at all. All of these things follow the rule that anything above zero compounds. And if you start to just flip these switches off when you find yourself in a busy time in life, the unfortunate thing is you're going to end up in a world where they have atrophied. You can't live in this like on off switch with these different areas because that is what most of us do. We live in this world of laters. We say, I'll spend more time with my kids later. I'll spend more time with my wife or my friends later. I'll focus on my health later. I'll find my purpose later. And the reality is that later just becomes another word for never because those things aren't going to exist in the same way later. Your kids are not going to be 8 years old later. Your wife and your friends aren't going to be there for you later if you aren't there for them now. Your health isn't going to be there later. All of these things, if you don't invest in them now in some way, design them into your life in some small way to invest on a daily basis in them. Otherwise, you end up just regretting it later.
All right. Number three is mental wealth, which um, I assumed was purpose, and I still tend to think is purpose. Though when you started your the chapter, it felt like you were saying the answer, at least in part, is curiosity. And I love the fact that it's the words behind you that you named your newsletter Substack the Curiosity Chronicles long before the book was a thing. Uh, I felt in some ways less certain I knew what exactly mental wealth is afterward. Talk to us about how you depict mental wealth. Hopefully, it can encompass both curiosity, which I value immensely myself, but also purpose, which
Yeah.
I'm working on.
Curiosity is just the unlock that enables you to find your mental wealth. Curiosity is sort of the conduit, if you will, to finding mental wealth. And mental wealth is really about purpose. It's about growth. It's about creating the space in your life to wrestle with some of the bigger picture, unanswerable questions of our existence, whether through religion, spirituality, meditation, solitude. But when I think of mental wealth, I very much think of some of these ancient texts, some of these ancient stories, the hero's journey, if you will. I think of, from my own mom's background, Dharma, the idea from the Bhagavad Gita of uh, your sacred duty. And the fact that it doesn't have to be grand or ambitious or impressive to anyone else, but it just has to be yours. It just has to be something that you connect to on a daily basis. And I very much think of curiosity as the pathway to unlocking those things, to finding those things. Because unless you are willing to explore enough, which is what curiosity enables, you will never find that sacred duty. You will never find that hero's journey that we want to find ourselves on.
So you knew you wanted to write a book. It was a process. It involved a lot of interviews. What surprised you? What were you not expecting through the course of doing the research and the writing? And now we are like days away from the formal launch. And I would note for all those who are attending, as always, we bought 100 copies. We'll send our link around. Looks like we got more than 100 live people. So act fast because otherwise you're going to Amazon. Though it's well worth it. It's such a wonderful book. But as you were doing the work and going through the process, what did you not expect that you learned?
I would say that the book became much more about humans and about the human experience and human storytelling than I expected it to. Um, when I originally set out to write the book, I thought it was going to be more of like a businessy framework kind of book. And you've read it. It is very much an emotional call to action and very deep human stories that you are going to find yourself in, that you are going to connect to, that are going to force you to ask some of the questions that you've been avoiding in your life, that are going to lead to discussion with people that you love, that are going to spark some tiny action in your life. That surprised me. And that also enriched me in many ways because I got to spend time with people from all variety and walks of life. I mean, I don't tell the stories of like the rich, successful business people that you read about in business biographies. And very specifically, I didn't want to because we read those memoirs, we read those biographies. And frankly, one of the biggest realizations I've had in my own life is that the people that I read books about, I would very rarely want to trade lives with. And that is a pretty powerful realization when you just start to say that maybe the people that we've been celebrating as a society are not the people we should be celebrating. Maybe there are people living wealthy lives in their own ways, carving their own paths into the earth that deserve a whole lot more respect and love than they've been getting. And I think everyone that reads this will find themselves in it somewhere. And I just, frankly, I feel lucky to have had the opportunity to tell some of these stories, to share these with the world, and hopefully to be a tiny catalyst in people making small changes in their lives that will create a whole lot of benefit and ripples.
Right, last question, although it's really two questions as I look at it because they're different. But first, I'm always interested in what other people are reading. I don't need a specific book as much as are there writers you feel like are like you can't say Arthur Brooks. You collaborated with him. I bet everyone on this call knows and loves Arthur Brooks. He's the god of this stuff. Pick a few maybe that aren't quite so obvious, up and comers or not traditional. And then the second, frankly, different question is what's next for you, Sahil?
So on your first question, Arthur is amazing. He is a collaborator on this. I'm actually doing an event at Harvard Business School with him tomorrow for the launch. He's fantastic. I really, frankly, am a fan of reading things that are like massively off the beaten path. I don't read a whole lot of nonfiction. I read a lot of fiction because I find uh, there is an impact on how broadly I think about the world when I read, fiction, when I read sci-fi, when I expand myself beyond. So, if there's one thing or two things I could recommend everyone read that I think will expand your mind, one would be a short story called "The Last Question" by Isaac Asimov, which you can find online for free. It's incredible and jarring. And then another short story by Andy Weir called The Egg, which is also similarly incredible. Both are like somewhere between 5 and 20 minute reads and very mind expanding and interesting.
Andy Weir is the Martian guy.
The Martian and Project Hail Mary, which is probably
Yep.
my favorite sci-fi book of the last 5, 10 years. And then in terms of what's next for me, I have no idea. Um, I uh, I'm not a big planner. I am a big believer that the most interesting opportunities in life are inherently invisible until you start walking and uncover them. I think it was Rumi that said, "As you start to walk on the way appears." And I really try to live my life that way. I'm very excited to have this book out in the world and to start walking and see what opportunities may come. And I hope that they involve creating an impact. I very much hope that they involve acts of service to others because that's where I find the true joy in the things that I get to do. So I'm just thankful for the opportunity to do this with you. It really is an incredible full circle moment for me to get to have this conversation after the years that I've admired your work and to be able to be in this seat and have this. I'm honestly just in a little bit of shock and awe. So thank you for affording me this opportunity.
Says the guy whose mentor is Tim Cook and is going to Harvard Business with Arthur Brooks tomorrow. Sahil Bloom, you're kicking ass. The book is fantastic. I really enjoyed it. This was a terrific interview. And with the exception of your claim that you don't have an entrepreneurial bone in your body, on which I am calling BS, other than that, really wonderful truths and insights. I appreciate everybody joining us. I'll send around the link probably later today, like I always do. Sign up, and if we've run out, Amazon will not run out. And I am confident this is going to be a New York Times bestseller because it's a really wonderful book. Sahil, great to see you, my friend. Good luck with the rollout.
Thank you so much, everybody. Really appreciate everyone's time.